Lydia always gives me a hard time anytime she sees me with a blazer and shoes on, and she's telling me to wear a hoodie and flip-flops, which is, after all, my most comfortable attire, but I decided I would dress up for the occasion. So, as you heard from Lydia, I'm helping to drive innovation within the world's largest staffing company, HR services company. And it struck me as I was preparing this talk that really, it's a great honor to be here speaking with you, because so much of my career wouldn't have happened without my colleagues in HR, without folks like you that created opportunities for me through incredible talent and leadership development sessions at business schools like IMD and innovation sessions at companies like Hyper Island that the HR folks brought me to. And so I hope that the takeaway that you get from my talk today is an opportunity to go and empower folks like me that are already within your organization. So it's great to be here. So my story actually begins a few years ago when I was actually strongly considering leaving my company, quitting my job, and going to found my own company. You see, I have a passion for technology, which a lot of times comes across with people like me, technology folks, as I got to go buy the latest iPhone or the latest gadget, or I have to have Google Glass or the latest wearable fitness accessory. And really, that's not what drives me, not what motivates me. You see, I really believe in using technology to create change in the world, to look at problems that we see in the workplace and in our lives, and think about ways that we can use technology to solve those problems. And new ideas, epiphanies, as Lydia mentioned, occur to me all the time. And I actually have the ability to make them a reality. I still can code. I can still create my own products. I know how to build teams that can create those products. And so, a few years back, working inside of a large company, and keeping up with the tech blogs and seeing all these new startups popping up and 10 people selling to Facebook for $1 billion and all that kind of stuff. I was like, wow, am I doing the right thing here? Should I really quit my job? And do I have what it takes to go be an entrepreneur? So I grappled with that for a while, but ultimately I did what really any good citizen of the digital age would do. And so I Googled it. And so it wasn't too long before I found this article, 20 questions to ask yourself if you want to be an entrepreneur. So at first I was a little put off. Seemed like it more belonged in like a teen magazine, 20 questions to ask your boyfriend or something like that. But it was on the Harvard Business Review website, so I said, hey, I should go through that and take a look. And it was a good thing that I did, because it wasn't too long that I figured out it really wasn't for me. See, first, I'm a drummer, which most musicians would say does disqualify me from being an entrepreneur, as I'm probably not smart enough. But really, beyond that, drumming was a career that I wanted to pursue after college. And it was really fun. Playing in bands is great. Great way to meet members of the opposite sex, but ultimately, it doesn't pay very well. And so when I got to the question, are you willing to work long hours, lots of blood, sweat, and tears, and more than likely not make any money? I had to be honest with myself, and I was like, no way, that's not going to work for me. Beyond that, I'm a husband to a wonderful wife and father of 4 kids. We kind of overachieved in this area. And so, when I got to the question that said, are you willing to risk everything you have? Are you willing to put everything on the line in pursuit of this startup and risk having to lose it all and start over again? Absolutely not. I have 5 amazing reasons why I'm not going to do that. So then, okay, a little depressed. I'm not going to go be the next Mark Zuckerberg. I will wear a hoodie from time to time, but I'm not going to be him. So, what could I do? So, of course, you probably figured it out. I went back to Google and I searched a little more. And it wasn't too long before I found another role, another word, intrapreneur. What that describes is people like me that work inside of large companies who have a passion for creating new products and who thrive on risk. You're never going to hear me ask for permission. My favorite way to operate is to seek forgiveness. And so, that sounded like me. That sounded like a great opportunity. And so, okay, so that's what I want to do, but how the heck do I go do that? Is there even a job title in my company called intrapreneur? And so, as it happened, the HR manager for my company, who's actually in the room here today, had me sit down for the once a year, fill out a talent profile, and I, kind of wrote that down. And no offense to all you HR folks, but I had zero expectation that would actually lead to anything. But I guess I should have had some more faith, because a few months later, what seemed like a really strange coincidence, I got invited to go to a class at Hyper Island, which is a school primarily based in Stockholm in Sweden, but they have facilities around the world where they run 3-day executive master classes, on innovation and disruption. And so maybe you'll sense a trend with me, but I was at first skeptical. I was like, why do I need to go to Sweden to learn from these crazy guys with slick back hair, what innovation is? I mean, I'm an American. I mean, we know what innovation is. Why do I have to go to Europe to learn about that? And so, when I got there, it turned out it was really fun because we got to learn about dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are creatures that failed to adapt to changes in their environment and as a result became extinct. And it turns out this is a really useful metaphor to apply to companies. And while we were there, we looked at a few. And one of them in particular was Kodak, which I'm sure you're all familiar with the story of them. Kodak was a great brand in its time, and still today, it's a great brand. And from a business standpoint, it captured over 90% of the US film market. But then in 2012, they went bankrupt. And so, we looked, why did this happen? And, one of the things was clearly the technology disruption. Pictures used to be something you took on film. You went to a film development place, a pharmacy, got your pictures developed, and then you stuck them in a picture frame. Maybe you stuck them in a shoebox. Maybe you stuck them in a photo album, and you really didn't look at them all that much. Maybe when a company came over, you pulled them out and you looked at them. And so then along came digital photography. So then you could take a picture. You didn't have to get it developed. You could store many more of them on a card in your camera. You could store them on your computer. But fundamentally, still, that act of taking pictures and the way you shared pictures didn't change. But then came the Web 2.0 and the social networks, and that did fundamentally change. Suddenly, pictures are the way that you could share your life in real time with your friends and family. And Kodak just couldn't keep up with that. And so beyond the technology changes, we looked at why did this really happen. And ultimately, it was complacency. You see, Kodak had a very profitable film business, and they didn't understand that this technology was going to disrupt them, which is kind of crazy if you think about it, because Kodak engineers actually invented the digital camera in 1975. And then in 1981, they did an extensive study to say, do we have to be worried about digital? And the study told them that they had 10 years to prepare for the advent of digital photography. But they still didn't react. They couldn't stomach the thought of this digital business unit cannibalizing the revenue from their film business. And so while we were there at Hyper Island, it's easy to look at these business cases and say, it's to be the Monday morning quarterback, what dummies they were. I mean, we have the benefit of hindsight, and it seems so obvious now, right? But then, the instructors turn the question towards us and say, are you guilty of those same things? Are your companies dinosaurs as well? Are you failing to see the threats to your business? And so that's a pretty hard question to get asked, and it makes you, pretty uncomfortable. And I've seen this get asked of people in a number of ways, and, I've seen a pattern that exists. And first is people tend to be skeptical. What do you mean? My company's fine. Our share price is awesome. Our revenue is doing great. We're growing. Our margins are great. And the problem is that's a predictor of past performance, not where you're going to go into the future. And so typically something triggers that change in somebody, whether it's a scare story like Kodak, is your company going to be a dinosaur, or it's something about really the power and the transformational nature of technology today. And so for me, one of those stories that really always resonates with me is video chat. And so if you saw my family, my oldest is 16 years old and my youngest is 4. And so when I used to travel a lot, when the oldest was about 3 or 4, the only way that I could communicate with him was via telephone. And I think most of you have experienced what it's like to talk to a 4-year-old on the telephone. Their voices are too high. You have absolutely no idea what they're saying. They're completely confused. They don't know where you are, when you're coming home. And it's just not a good experience. And so with the younger kids, though, I can Skype or Google Hangout with them, and it's completely transformational because they can see my face, I can see them. One of their favorite things for them to do, I don't fully understand it, but every time I get into a hotel room, they want me to turn the camera around and show them the whole hotel room, especially the toilet and the bathtub. So, and so, that really transforms that experience. And so then typically people hear stories like that and then they get excited. And they're like, wow, this is awesome. Technology really is changing the world and this is great and there's just so much opportunity. And then they pause and they say, well, wait a minute. Our company, my CEO doesn't believe in innovation. My CFO, no way will they ever let us do anything. Our culture isn't in the place where we can, have ideas and we get shot down. And so then they panic and they say, oh gosh, my company really is a dinosaur. We're screwed, And so, the great thing is that it's not too late. If you think about it, the world is being disrupted by people with nothing more than a laptop and a credit card and a willingness to work at night and on weekends on their passion projects and create. We live in an age when it's just cheaper and easier to create software and technology than it's ever been, as well as with the rise of 3D printing, all that's going to unlock. And so if you think about, you're worried about being disrupted by something that starts with one person with no resources. And we all work for companies with incredible assets, with lots of amazing employees who know the industry so well, with customers, with all kinds of resources. Why should the lion be scared of the mouse? And so, the key thing is to really find those opportunities, to find those budding entrepreneurs that already exist in all of your companies and help for them do what happened to me. Expose them to opportunities to learn and get their talent developed, and let them rub shoulders with the executives in your company and give them the opportunity to pitch their ideas. And so this actually happened to me. So I was at Hyper Island, and all the executive leadership of the company was there, and I kind of worked up the courage to sidle up to the CEO. He's sort of this imposing Belgian figure, great guy, Patrick, and I said, hey, Patrick, hey, you brought us here to this place, and I've got this idea. Do you mind if can we spend 5 minutes and I'll pitch it to you? And he said, okay, Sean, go ahead. So I said, what about creating an incubator within Adecco? What about creating an innovation lab where we can fight fire with fire and use the same techniques that startups are using against us to disrupt our industries? Why do we have to sit back and just watch these companies come along and watch LinkedIn move into this space, and why can't we combat that? And so he thought for a little bit, and he has a way of looking at you over his reading glasses, and kind of stared me down for a minute, and then he said, okay, Sean, that's a great idea. Go forth and innovate. So then I had my own little journey from excitement to panic. And so I said, okay, what have I done? I've convinced him of something. It's funny, people ask me how I got to where I am in my career, and I have to tell them the story of how I've literally in my life sawed the branch off that I was standing on. My wife came out and yelled at me, what are you doing? And I was like, well, this is the only way to get the branch down. And so actually that's what I tend to do in my career, is I tend to saw the branch off and then say, oh, I guess I'm going to have to jump. And so, we had to figure out what it meant to go forth and innovate. And so we assembled a team, and, what we didn't want to do was create, this big plan of how we were going to go forth and innovate. We didn't want to do what so many companies do, which is, hey, we're going to create an idea portal and then have no resources to develop any of those ideas. That's not really going to do anything. And so, we did some good stuff, but we sort of muddled around a little bit for about 6 months or so. And then we started to figure out what we needed to have in place to be successful at innovating. And the first is a vision. And so I'm not talking about the typical bland corporate vision statement, which is typically crap, if you'll pardon the expression. What I'm talking about is your company exists to make the future and to make the future a better place. So you need a vision statement that helps inspire your people to see how are we impacting the world and how are we making it a better place. Kodak is an example of a bad vision. Their vision was effectively to sell more film. Which is bad on a number of levels, not the least of which is that if you don't have film anymore, what are you going to do? But if you think about Disney, where we are today, their vision is to make people happy, And they generally do, especially my 4-year-old who has heard the song Let It Go from Frozen, I think, about 10,000 times in the last few months. Didn't make me quite as happy. But, they see a world where people are happier, going to their theme parks and watching the movies. You think about Tesla. Their vision is to bring electric cars to the masses, and they see this future world where we're consuming fewer fossil resources, having less impact on the environment, and making transportation more economical and affordable for more people. And as you see, they're iterating towards that. First, they did luxury cars because that was the easiest thing to sell, and then the Model S, which has brought it down a level, and they're going to continue to iterate. And so their vision describes this future that they're driving for. And so we said, okay, well, we need a vision at Ignite. And so we're smart. We can figure out a great vision. And so we muddled around for a while. And then, it actually turned out we went to our corporate parent, the Adecco Group's website, and we saw they already had a great vision. It's better work, better life. And what that meant to us is we see a future where more people are empowered by better work, which is more financially rewarding to them, more rewarding to them as individuals. And we all know what the transformational power of a great job is, whether it's financially or loving what you do every day. That's so transformational in your life. And so that's what really motivates us every day. So then, okay, that's great. So now we know where we're headed. We're headed north, but there's all these rocks and trees and mountains and hills in our way. And so, how are we going to get there? And so, again, we muddled around a little bit, but then really it settled in, and we found kind of these 4 elements of the how that you get there. And they're human, digital, lean, and data. And these are the elements of innovation that need to be in place. They're not a Gantt chart process for how to get there, but they're guideposts on how to get it. And I'd like to share a few stories with you about why these elements are so important. So the first is humans, and that is we need to be inspired by human problems. And I think too often, we say the term HR and we forget that deep inside there's people, there's humans. And, all companies in the world either exist to serve consumers or to build things for those who are, indirectly serving consumers. And so it's so critical to understand all of those people. And so there's a great example, and sometimes it's hard for me to tell this story without getting kind of a tear in my eye, but there's a guy named Doug Dietz who works for GE, and he's a product designer. And he and his team created this award-winning MRI, and so it's just state-of-the-art machine, unbelievable in its diagnostic ability. And so Doug went to see it after it was, finished at a hospital, and he was kind of there taking a look at it, patting himself on the back at like, wow, we're just awesome. This is a badass machine we created. And so then, he's watching and this young family approached. And so he saw this mother and this dad and this little girl around 9 years old. And he was like, what's happening? They're completely stressed out. The little girl is on the verge of tears. And she's talking about, Mommy, do I have to lie still for 45 minutes? Oh, Mommy, I'm so scared. Mommy, don't make me do this. And it just cut him to the core. This machine that he was so proud of and just so amazed at how great it was had caused so much stress and agony in this family's life. And you think about it, you don't get an MRI when you're healthy, so this family's probably already stressed out about what could be wrong with their daughter. And so, that really just hit him hard. And so he went back and he ended up enrolling at a course at the Stanford D School in human-centered design and kind of thought about different ways to solve this problem. And the key thing about human is empathy. That is the number one key aspect of this. Empathy is putting yourself in someone else's shoes and seeing the world from their perspective. And so that's what he and his team did. They imagined they were a 9-year-old girl having to go get an MRI. And, what would you want if you were in that position? How would you want to do it? And so it unlocked a tremendous amount of creativity. And so without any changes to their technology over the next 6 to 12 months, they ended up creating, this, which is a themed visit to an MRI machine. So they painted the walls of the room, they put stickers on it, and they created these themes. So that's an example of a pirate theme over there. And so they actually gave scripts to the operators of the MRI, and so it made it much more like going to Disney World and going to a ride and said, okay, now you're going to lay down and we're going to move you out to our boat, and when you hear loud noises, that's us firing our cannons at our enemy's ships, and they made it this really fun experience. And so Doug went back and saw it, and he watched it in action, and this time he was a little bit more humbled, so he was waiting to see the reaction rather than patting himself on the back from the beginning. And so, he saw this little girl went in and she, talked to her mother, and he overheard her, and she said, "Mommy, that was so fun. Can I come back tomorrow?" And so, that was just great and meaningful. And the great thing about this is that it actually makes perfect business sense as well. And so before this change, hospitals had to anesthetize over 80% of their pediatric patients. And that's expensive, risky, time-consuming, and afterwards it dropped to 10%. And so the hospitals just loved it because now they didn't, they have to have this expense and risk, and they can get many more patients going through the MRI in a day. So that's human, and that's why it's so important. The next element is digital. So we need to create digital solutions. And the reality is digital is just a gateway to network. And so, I think, an interesting thing that most of us have experienced in our lives is what happened in newspapers. I actually used to be a paper boy when I was in elementary school. I wasn't quite, I'm not quite that old. But, the newspapers used to be something where, had the news board of this newspaper decided what stories were important for their community, and they would aggregate them, and then, they'd write the stories, and they'd print the newspaper out early in the morning, and then it would get delivered once or twice a day. And so, that's how we all used to get our news. But then along came the internet, and so then, newspapers went from analog to digital. But now it was a similar thing. You could go to a website and you could read, the New York Times website, and you can get your information from there. But it's still a similar activity in that you're going to one place to get your news. But then along came the social networks and the Twitters and the Facebooks and apps like I use, like Flipboard, which allows you go out on Twitter, you follow the people that you're interested in the companies, you follow people on Facebook, and then Flipboard aggregates all of that information for you. And so when you want to get your news, you just pull out your iPad or your phone and you start flipping through those stories. And now you're getting news that's relevant to you because you follow who you want to, you know who's influential, and it's just an incredible amount of value that you get out of that, rather than saying, okay, the first thing I have to read is what the top story in the news is, I still get news through there. I know what's happening in Crimea through there, but I also know what's happening in technology and in the latest in innovation. And so it's an incredible change when you go from that analog to digital to really the power of networks. The third element is to work lean and fast. And I think the worst thing that you can do once you're inspired by these human stories and the digital and all the things you guys would hear at this conference, lots of valuable stuff, is to go back and make a plan for implementing it. And now we have this Gantt chart, and over the next 2 years, we're going to implement all this stuff. I mean, our world is constantly changing, and by the time you create that plan, let alone implement it, the plan is totally wrong, and there's no way you're going to be successful. And so the key is to work fast. I tell my team constantly that speed is our greatest weapon. And the key to speed is just keep things simple. Just keep it simple. The simpler it is, the easier to implement. And a company that's doing a great job with this is Nordstrom. They created Nordstrom Innovation Labs. And so that one time they took their team for a week into their flagship store, and they went into the glasses section, and they watched the process of people buying glasses. I have glasses, many of you do, and I think you know what it's like when you're trying on frames and you put one on, you're like, what does that one look like? And then you try another one on, and pretty soon you've got 4 or 5, and you're trying to remember which one was the one that you liked, and is this better than that? And it's, it's not the greatest process in the world. So the team was there, they saw, they went into the environment and saw people in their natural habitat buying glasses, and so they came up in the course of a week, from the idea to the building of it in this store, they came up with an iPad app where the sales associates could take a picture of people as they tried on glasses, and then once they tried on a few, show them, and let them flip through and decide which one they liked the best, which totally changed that process of buying glasses, made it much more fun and easier to walk out, happy with what you'd selected. So then the final piece is that you have to learn from data. And you've heard already several great points from the speakers before about the power of data. And I think the challenge for us is that this can be a little bit intimidating a concept. I mean, we're constantly hearing about how in the last 5 minutes we've created more information in the world than in the dawn of humanity. And then you hear terms like big data and data science, and that's the hottest new thing. No, wait, that's not the hottest new thing. This is the hottest new thing. And I think it can cause us, especially those of us who are not technical, to kind of be a little bit intimidated and fearful. And what does data really mean? And how can that, it's sort of this nice abstract concept, but I don't know how to apply it. And the reality is, we can't shy away from data. We have to dive right in, and there's many levels to leveraging data. And a company that's really doing a great job with it is O-Power. They actually just went public last week. And what O-Power's vision is they see a world where we use less energy. And there's so many companies today focused on creating alternative sources of energy, but O-Power's idea is that if we just use less of it, then there's less that we have to convert to alternative sources. And so they wanted to figure out how to motivate consumers, whose current interface with their, utility company is to, this meter and, hard to get the information out of there. How could they motivate consumers to do the things we all know are the right things to do, like turn off their lights? And so they started by leveraging data by looking at survey results. So it was a survey done by some graduate students that went into a neighborhood and tried different ways of trying to motivate people to get them to reduce their electricity consumption. And so one thing they tried was, hey, if you do this, you'll save money. Nobody did it. And they said, it's the right thing to do for the environment. Nobody did anything with that. And so they tried a few different more, and what they ultimately found was that what motivated people to change their behavior was to tell them, your neighbors are saving more money than you. And so I think we all know what it's like to keep up with the Joneses. What kind of car are they driving? What do they have in their house? And their kid can play violin with his feet and piano with his hands at the same time. Like, we're all motivated by that desire to kind of keep up with everybody else. And so O-Power creates tools for electric companies, utility companies, to share with consumers. So take data from all their consumption of their electricity and share that back with consumers and say, here's how you're doing compared to your neighbors with similar houses to you. And they find that this really does motivate behavior. And so in 2013, O-Power saved over 1.9 terawatts of power, which who knows what that means, but what it translates to is enough energy to power all the homes in Miami for a year. So it's a pretty powerful combination of data and then the human psychology. So those are the elements of innovation: the human, the digital, the lean, and data. And so, okay, so we had our vision, we had our why, we had our, how are we going to get there? And then, it really occurred to us that there's this one other piece. And so, you guys are all HR professionals, and so I think you would agree with me that people are the greatest asset of your company. People in general, they're hardworking, they're dedicated, they're motivated, but we don't get everything out of them that we can because we don't empower them. Today, typically, and you've heard, examples of where we're going, but today, typically, companies are still organized in these corporate silos by function, which was established in the industrial age. And then people are ensnared with red tape and complex processes. And I think anyone who's tried to purchase a laptop for themselves inside a company, so many of us just say, forget it, I'll just go buy my own laptop and use it here. That's such a pain in the neck to use that procurement stuff. And then we put them in boxes of specialized roles and kind of contain them with it. These are your exact job functions. And then we step back and we just get depressed and say, our people can't think outside of the box. So we put them in the box. And the problem is all that stuff is really dinosaur thinking. And we see where that leads. And so, the challenge that I leave with you is to think about and I respectfully disagree with Kathy, I think actually HR does have a responsibility to contribute to culture. Because culture is really what drives innovation. Innovation is not about ideas. The act of having an idea and opening your mouth is an incredibly vulnerable one. I'm talking about a future that doesn't exist, and I have this crazy idea, and I'm going to be brave enough to open my mouth. And if you have a culture where those people are laughed at, ignored, or shut down and said, go back and do your job, your company will never innovate. But if instead you think about the impact that your colleagues have had on me and how the talent development programs have helped identify the folks within your companies, give them the forum to pitch their ideas to the executives, and then help make sure they have a vision that can inspire them, help enlighten them with the elements of digital innovation, and if you're able to do that and really embrace that, your companies will not be dinosaurs, I guarantee you. Thank you very much.